It had been 6 years. The carpet creaked in spots it never used to. My posters were gone from the walls. My desk cleared. It was neat, almost staged. But as I got into bed, I heard something. Not the normal house creaks, not the hum of the fridge or the faint buzz of streetlights outside. This was different. A soft shuffle coming from the crawl space beneath the house. I held my breath. Then came a low sound, like someone trying not to cough. I froze. The air in the room seemed to thicken, my chest heavy with unease. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, right? Pipes, raccoons, whatever. I pulled the blanket higher and eventually drifted off. But before I fell asleep, I realized something that made my stomach knot. When I first arrived, Mom had said Dad was in the back. It had been 6 hours and I hadn't seen him once. Why is Dad hiding? What's making noises under the house? I woke the next morning to the faint smell of coffee drifting through the hallway. For a moment, everything felt normal. The kind of summer morning I remembered from high school. But when I stepped into the kitchen, the familiarity shattered. Dad sat at the table, a mug in front of him, but his shoulders were hunched, his skin pale and clammy. He didn't look up when I entered. "Morning," I said. "Morning," he muttered, voice low. He kept his eyes fixed on the steam curling out of his coffee, as if afraid of breaking concentration. Mom stood by the counter, fussing with toast. Too much fussing. She spread butter, scraped it off, spread it again. Her hands trembled. I tried to break the silence. "So, what have you guys been up to?" Dad's lips pressed tight. Mom answered quickly. "Oh, just the usual." "The usual?" Nothing about this felt usual. Halfway through breakfast, I asked, "What's with the noises at night?" Dad's spoon froze against the inside of his mug. Mom's head whipped toward me. "What noises?" she asked sharply. "The crawl space. I heard something moving." Dad finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. "House settles. Animals get in. It's nothing." But the way he said it wasn't casual. It was practiced, like a line rehearsed too many times. Later that afternoon, I found myself wandering toward the back of the house. My old basketball hoop leaned rusted against the fence, the grass uncut. But what caught my eye was the crawl space hatch. A padlock now hung from it, shiny and new. We'd never locked the crawl space before. I crouched, pressing my ear against the wooden frame. For a while, nothing. Just the muffled sound of a car passing on the street. Then, a scrape. Metal against wood. Slow, intentional. I jerked back. My parents never mentioned locking it. They never mentioned why they had to. That evening, I decided to push. At dinner, I leaned back, in my chair, pretending to sound casual. "So, why's the crawl space locked?" Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Mom immediately stood, snatching his plate before he could answer. "We've had raccoons, big ones." "Raccoons don't need a padlock," I said before I could stop myself. The room fell silent. Dad stared at me then, his jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he was going to finally say something. His lips parted. But then Mom cut him off. "Eat your food," she snapped. The next few minutes stretched unbearably. The only sounds were forks scraping against plates, the hum of the fridge, and the faint thump-thump from the floor beneath us. I froze mid-bite, that sound directly under the dining table. I glanced at my parents. Neither reacted. Neither even looked down. They just kept chewing, as if they didn't hear it, as if they'd learned not to. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake. I couldn't stop thinking about the noise, the scrape, the thump. Around 2 a.m., the house had gone silent. My parents were asleep. That's when I heard it again. A slow shuffle, then a pause, then a faint cough. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't pipes. It was someone. And they were living under the house. Who, or what, is under the crawl space? Why are the parents covering it up? The next morning, I couldn't shake the sounds from the night before. A cough, not an animal, not a house creak. A human cough muffled by layers of wood and dirt. I needed to know what was going on. While Mom was out in the garden and Dad was dozing in his recliner, I quietly slipped out the back door. The sun was bright, the air heavy with cut grass from a neighbor's yard, but the sight of that crawl space hatch killed any sense of normalcy. The padlock gleamed in the light, brand new, expensive, the kind of lock you didn't buy unless you were protecting something. I ran my fingers over it, then over the edges of the hatch, dusty, but around the keyhole, the wood was rubbed raw, worn down, as if it was opened often, too often. I crouched lower, pressing my ear against the frame again. Nothing, just the faint whistle of summer wind. I waited, and then a scrape. Not the casual scuttle of an animal, something dragging slowly across the dirt floor, followed by a sound that twisted my stomach into knots. A whisper. It wasn't words, not clearly, just the cadence of someone murmuring to themselves. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. Who the hell was under there? That night, while my parents slept, I decided to snoop. I crept through the house, careful not to let the old floorboards creak. The air conditioner hummed, masking the sound of my steps. First stop, the kitchen. Mom kept everything obsessively neat. Labels forward, spice jars alphabetized. But the pantry caught my attention. Cans. Stacks of them, more than I remembered. Tomato soup, beans, tuna, rows and rows neatly arranged, and behind them empty spaces where others had clearly been taken, except they weren't on the counters, they weren't in the fridge. I checked the trash. Empty cans, at least 20 of them. Someone was eating down there. I moved to the laundry room next. At the back, where the washing machine sat, I found something that made my skin crawl. A vent cover loose at the bottom. I knelt down and pulled. Inside, wedged into the duct, was a dirty paper plate, stained with what looked like beans, and next to it, a crumpled piece of newspaper. I smoothed it out, my hand shaking. The date on it was 6 weeks ago, but my parents didn't even get the paper delivered. That meant whoever was under there had brought it in, or my parents had given it to them. I shoved the vent back and retreated to my room, heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. I couldn't sleep. My brain kept circling the same questions. Who was down there? How long had they been living under my parents' house? And why were my parents protecting them? Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. A shuffle, a cough, a long, low sigh. This time, I pressed my ear to the floorboards in my bedroom. It was unmistakable. There was someone directly beneath me. The narrator now knows it's not animals. It's a person. But who is it? And why won't the parents talk? I barely slept. When the first light seeped through the blinds, I sat upright in bed, staring at the floor. I knew what I'd heard, and if I was right, someone had been lying under me all night long. The thought was unbearable. That morning, I made myself act normal. Mom was humming while she chopped vegetables. Dad sipping coffee at the table. They looked ordinary, peaceful. But when I opened the fridge, I noticed something that made my skin tighten. 3 missing packs of deli meat. They'd been there yesterday. "Did you guys eat all the ham already?" I asked casually. Mom didn't look up. "Oh, I tossed it. It went bad." But the trash can was empty. That night, I made a decision. I was going to catch them. Whoever was down there, I stayed awake in my room with the lights off, crouched near the window that overlooked the backyard. The crawlspace hatch sat in plain sight, just beyond the line of shrubs. The air was humid, filled with the buzz of crickets. Hours dragged by. Midnight, 1, 2. Then it happened, the hatch creaked. I froze, holding my breath. Slowly, the padlock rattled. Then, unbelievably, it opened. A hand emerged first. Thin, pale, filthy. The nails long, yellowed. Then a figure slithered out, dragging itself up into the night air. It was a man, or at least he had once been. He was rail-thin, his clothes torn and caked with dirt. His hair hung in greasy mats around his face. He crouched low, animal-like, but his movements were deliberate, and in his hands, a grocery bag. I squinted. Inside were canned goods, bread, and what looked like one of Mom's Tupperware containers. He didn't run, he didn't sneak, he just stood there, head jerking slightly like he was listening for something. Then, to my horror, he looked up, not directly at me, but toward my parents' bedroom window, and he smiled. I ducked back, heart in my throat, every nerve screaming. I waited, counting the seconds. In my head, when I dared to peek again, the hatch was closed. The padlock clicked shut. He was gone. The next morning, I confronted my parents. "There's someone living under this house," I said flatly. I saw him. They froze. Mom's knife hovered mid-slice. Dad's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. For a moment, they didn't say a word. Then Dad forced a chuckle. "Don't be ridiculous. You've been watching too many crime shows." But I could see it. The way Mom's hands trembled, the way they wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew. They knew all along. The narrator has seen the intruder. It's real, flesh and blood, and the parents are clearly hiding something. But what? The next morning, I couldn't stand the silence between us. Dad was buried in the newspaper. Mom cleaning dishes she'd already washed twice. Their avoidance was deafening. Finally, I slammed my coffee mug down. "Stop pretending I saw him. Someone is living under this house." Mom flinched. Dad's paper trembled in his hands. And then, very slowly, Mom whispered, "You weren't supposed to know." The room went cold. What do you mean I wasn't supposed to know? I demanded. Dad folded the paper, his jaw tightening. He didn't look angry. He looked scared, Mom's eyes filled with tears. He's not dangerous, she said. At least, not to us. That phrasing chilled me more than anything else could. I pushed. Who is he? Neither of them answered right away. Dad finally muttered, someone who needed a place to stay, that's all you need to know. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A place to stay? He's squatting under your house like a rat. He came out last night. He's stealing your food, Mom snapped, her voice trembling. He's family. The words hit me like a blow, family. What do you mean, family? I demanded. I don't have an uncle. I don't have a cousin like that. Who is he? They looked at each other, some silent battle passing between them. Finally, Dad spoke. He's your brother. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. My brother? That was impossible. I was an only child, but Dad continued, voice low, each word heavy. Before you were born, your mother had another child. We couldn't care for him. He had problems, anger, violence. He was taken away, institutionalized. Mom was crying now. They released him years ago. He had nowhere to go, so we let him stay here. It's better than the streets. My head was spinning. I thought about the man's greasy hair, his skeletal body, the way he'd smiled up at their window like he belonged here. You're telling me you've been hiding a grown man and under this house? My whole life? Without ever telling me? Mom's hands were shaking as she tried to reach for mine. We didn't want you to be afraid. We thought we could manage it. He listens. He follows rules, mostly. Mostly, that word sat in my chest like a knife. Last night wasn't following rules, I said. He was in the yard. He was stealing food. He saw me. He saw you. Dad slammed his fist against the table. That's enough. He's your brother. End of discussion. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Couldn't forget the filthy smile under the moonlight. If this was their secret, it was far worse than I ever imagined. The intruder isn't a stranger. He's family, a hidden brother, violent and unstable, living beneath the house with the parents' knowledge. But what happens when mostly following rules stops being enough? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house felt amplified, like he was crawling through the walls. I tried to convince myself maybe my parents were right. Maybe he just needed food, warmth, family. But then, at 2:43 a.m., I heard it. The sound of my bedroom doorknob slowly turning. My body froze. I didn't breathe. The knob jiggled once, twice, then it stopped. Silence. I sat up in bed, clutching my phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. After a minute, the footsteps retreated down the hall. Bare feet, light and uneven, I waited until I was sure he was gone. Then I bolted. I stormed into my parents' room, whispering furiously, "He tried to open my door!" Mom gasped. Dad sat up instantly, but instead of shock, they just looked defeated. "We told him not to," Mom whispered. "You told him not to?" I hissed. "He's creeping into my room in the middle of the night, and all you have for me is, we told him not to?" Dad rubbed his face. "He has rules. He's supposed to stay out of your space, out of the upstairs, out of the bedrooms." My stomach turned. And what happens when he doesn't? Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay passive anymore. I waited until they left for groceries. Then I went into the basement. The smell hit me first, a sour ammonia stench like sweat and rot. The crawl space door was unlocked. I crouched and pulled it open. Inside, I saw it all. A filthy blanket balled in the corner, empty food wrappers scattered everywhere, a bucket rank with waste, scratch marks in the wood beams, long and deep, like fingernails dug in during some violent rage. But the worst part was the wall. Pinned to it were photographs, old ones, Of me as a child playing in the yard, me at my high school graduation, even a recent one, me last week watering the garden he'd been watching, collecting. Nung, I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some broken man squatting under the house. This was obsession. I scrambled out, slamming the crawl space shut. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the lock. When my parents returned, I confronted them again. I screamed about the pictures, the bucket, the scratches in the wood. They looked at me like I was overreacting. He just gets attached, Mom said softly. He doesn't mean harm. Attached. That word made my skin crawl. Dad's face was pale. He didn't argue, but he didn't deny it either. That night, I pushed a dresser against my door because if he tried again, I wasn't sure the knob would be the only thing he touched. The brother has rules, but he's breaking them. Creeping into bedrooms, collecting photos, blurring the line between family and obsession. How long until rules won't matter at all? The next morning, I found myself moving through the house like prey. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense. Every shadow seemed like it might move. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was clear. I wasn't afraid of a stranger anymore. I was afraid of family. I avoided the basement. I avoided being alone in the hallway, but eventually, I had to pass the kitchen. He was sitting at the table. It wasn't like before. He wasn't in the shadows. Half hidden, he sat there in the daylight, hunched, greasy hair falling into his face. A chipped mug clutched in his hands, and for the first time he looked directly at me. His eyes were pale, bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. "Morning," he rasped. I froze. Until now, he'd only made noises. Muttering, breathing, the sound of his feet in the walls. This was the first word, and he said it like it meant more than just a greeting, like it was a test. My mom came in behind me, smiling too wide. "See, he's trying." But her voice shook. I sat down across from him, pulse hammering. My parents hovered in the background like zookeepers, hoping the animals wouldn't fight. He sipped his mug. Then he asked me something that chilled me more than his presence ever had. "Do you remember me?" His voice was raw, shaky, almost childlike. But the question didn't make sense. I'd never seen him before this week. I swallowed hard. "No, I don't." He smiled. It was the wrong kind of smile, too wide, too knowing. "You used to play in the yard. I watched from the window. You'd look up sometimes, like you knew I was there." My stomach flipped. "No," I whispered. "That never happened." But he leaned forward, hands trembling around the mug. "You were mine before you even knew it." I stood up so fast the chair tipped over. Dad barked, "That's enough," and shoved him back down in the chair. Mom rushed to me, whispering, "He doesn't mean it. He gets confused." Confused, obsessive, dangerous. I couldn't tell which word was worse. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake it. Not just what he said, but the certainty in his voice. Like he believed it down to his bones. And if he believed it, then in his mind, there was nothing wrong with the photographs or the rules he broke or the way he stared through the crack of my door at night. I locked myself in my room again, but his voice echoed in my head long after dark. "Do you remember me?" Now the hidden brother is no longer silent, and his words hint at something even darker. He believes he's always been part of the family. But what happens when belief becomes obsession, and obsession turns into action? I thought I could avoid him. I thought if I stayed upstairs, if I kept my door locked, if I ignored the sounds of movement below me, I could make it through until I figured out a way to leave. But obsession doesn't stay quiet forever. It started with little things. I'd come into the kitchen, and my glass would be gone. I'd find it in the sink, already rinsed. I'd leave my shoes by the door, and they'd be lined up differently when I came back. At first, I thought it was my mom, her way of keeping order, but then I noticed It was always my things, never anyone else's. Late one night, I woke to the sound of something sliding under my door. I turned on the light and froze. It was a piece of lined paper, torn from a notebook. 4 words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. Don't trust them, me. I sat there staring, heart pounding. What was worse? That he'd slipped a note into my room, or that he thought he was protecting me. The next morning, I kept the note in my pocket. I wanted to confront my parents. I wanted to shout, to demand they see what was happening. But before I could say anything, he cornered me. It was in the narrow hallway between the bathroom and the stairs. I turned, and he was there, blocking the way. He leaned too close, his breath sour, his eyes wild. "They're lying to you," he whispered. "They're not who you think they are." I pressed myself back against the wall, my throat dry. "What are you talking about?" I managed. He grinned. "I hear them at night, talking about you, about what to do with you." My stomach flipped. "You're sick," I hissed. "Stay away from me." But his grin widened, his lips trembling. Then he whispered something that made my skin crawl. "If you don't listen, I'll have to make you." The words weren't shouted. They weren't even angry. They were calm, a promise. He stepped aside and let me pass, but my legs were shaking so badly I almost stumbled down the stairs. I told my parents. Finally, Mom's face went pale, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. Dad just clenched his jaw like he'd been expecting this moment. "He doesn't mean it," Mom said. "He's confused." But I saw it in their eyes. They knew this wasn't confusion anymore. This was escalation. That night, I pushed my desk against the door before I tried to sleep, and still, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice in the hallway. "If you don't listen, I'll have to make you." Now, it's no longer just lurking or watching. It's a direct threat, and the parents are running out of excuses. But what will happen when the truth finally cracks open? The next 48 hours felt like living in a pressure cooker. I barely left my room, except to grab food when I knew he wasn't around. My parents kept whispering in the kitchen, their voices sharp, frantic, and I could feel it. Something was about to snap. On the 3rd night, it did. I woke to the sound of scraping at my door, not knocking, not footsteps, scraping like someone dragging their fingernails across the wood, slow and deliberate. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The sound paused, then a whisper, right outside. "You don't understand. I'm trying to help you." I shoved the desk harder against the door, my chest heaving. That was when my dad's voice thundered from down the hall. "Enough!" There was a scuffle. Heavy footsteps, a yell, something slamming against the wall. I yanked open my door just in time to see my dad pinning him against the carpet, his knees on his chest. Mom stood in the doorway, pale as a ghost, clutching her phone. "Call them," Dad barked. Now she did. Within 20 minutes, flashing red and blue lights spilled across our windows. 2 officers came inside, their faces a mix of practiced calm and quiet unease. My uncle, or whatever he was, sat on the couch, wrists cuffed, muttering under his breath. But it wasn't the muttering that froze me. It was what he said when the officers tried to lead him out. "They don't want me gone," he hissed, staring straight at me. "They want you gone." I felt my stomach twist. "Don't listen to him," Dad said quickly, but I could see the panic in his eyes. The officers dragged him out the door, his voice carrying down the driveway. You'll see what they are." After the car pulled away, silence fell heavy in the house. I turned to my parents, expecting relief, gratitude, something. Instead, they just stood there, hollow-eyed. Finally, Mom whispered, almost to herself, "We should have told you sooner." The air left my lungs. "Told me what?" I demanded. They exchanged a look, and that's when I realized the horror wasn't over. It was only shifting. The intruder has been taken away. But his last words, and the reaction of the parents, suggest a darker truth is about to surface. What have they been hiding? The night after he was taken away, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word he'd said. They want you gone. You'll see what they are. When I finally confronted my parents in the kitchen, they didn't argue, they didn't even try to deflect. Dad just sighed, his hands trembling as he poured himself coffee. We should have told you years ago. What they said next didn't make sense at first. The man who'd been living in our house wasn't a stranger. He'd been here before, long before I was born. Back in the early 90s, when my parents first bought the house, they discovered something strange during renovations. Behind one of the walls in the basement was a small, hidden room. No windows, no real entrance, just a hollow space that looked like it had been sealed off decades earlier. Inside were blankets, food wrappers, and notebooks filled with ramblings. Someone had been living there. They didn't tell anyone, didn't call the cops, didn't want the house condemned or taken from them. Instead, they boarded it up again. Your uncle, Mom whispered, her voice breaking, wasn't the first. My skin crawled. What do you mean, wasn't the first? Dad looked at me then, not angry, not even ashamed, just tired. This house has always had someone, a drifter, a squatter, a runaway, I don't know. But every few years, one shows up. We've tried to chase them out. We've called police. We've even moved you to your grandparents once when it got bad. He rubbed his face. But they always come back. Someone always comes back. The realization hit me like a punch. The whispers, the scraping, the way that man knew things about us he shouldn't have. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't demons. It was people. People who had been living in the walls, the crawl spaces, the basement. For decades, Mom grabbed my hand. That's why we never wanted you sleeping alone when you were younger. Why we kept the bats cement locked. Why we always said don't wander at night. She was crying now. We thought we could protect you. We thought if we ignored it, if we locked the doors, it would stop. But it never did, because you can lock your doors. You can board up your walls. But what if the thing you're hiding isn't outside trying to get in? It's already inside trying to stay. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I didn't even stay in the house. I left. I don't know if my parents ever admitted the truth to the police or if the man they dragged away that night was really the last. But I do know one thing. When I drive past that house, even now, I never look at the windows because I'm terrified I'll see someone staring back.